now? Is the red button there? I can't see.
The red button says we're live.
Okay, you're live.
Great. Good morning. This is Senate Judiciary meeting on Wednesday, May 6th, remotely meeting again. The first order of business is the House proposed changes to S338, an act relating to justice reinvestment. And I'm going to start with Ellen Whelan-Wurst from the Justice Center, and then hear from Jim Baker and Bryn, who may be able to help us cover some of these changes, as well as some additional ideas from Commissioner Baker. So Ellen, why don't you and Bryn kind of hand it off, and I'm going to try to find my documents on a different, I guess we have to go to our page to find the documents. All right, Ellen, if you want to start, or Bryn. Hi.
Sure. I don't actually, I might pass it to you, Bryn. Hi, Ellen Whelan-Wurst, for the record, from the Council of State Governments Justice Center. It's nice to see everybody remotely, of course. I think the only thing I would offer, I'm available to answer any questions. Bryn at this point is, I mean, it's not news to anyone, but she really knows what's in the bill, and she's navigating all of the changes and the updates. A couple of things that I testified to last week to the House Corrections and Institutions Committee. One is that the Department of Corrections has requested a delayed implementation start date for earned good time to go into effect. And that when Monica Weber from DOC first mentioned, that would be at this point just realistic and necessary for DOC, given everything that the department is managing, we went back and looked at our numbers just to see how moving back everything in justice reinvestment 3 months from when we had originally modeled it, what that would do. And what I mean by 3 months is that when my former colleague Ed Weckerly had run impact numbers, we had just sort of been operating under the assumption that everything would go into effect on January 1st of 2021. So I went and asked another colleague who's filled in as Ed has left the Justice Center, just to move everything back 3 months. It was easier than choosing one policy. And what we found is that the bed impacts are pretty minimal, and the cost associated with that, or the decrease in the potential savings to the state over 5 years at the highest end of what is possible would be $579,000. And depending on which year you're looking at within that projection model, it sort of changes a few beds here and there. It's nothing dramatic. So what I had testified to in the House last week is that from the Justice Center's perspective, the most important thing about these policies is that they're well implemented. And that's really how you make sure that they are effective. And it would probably be counterproductive to try to hold the department to an early implementation date. October to us seems especially unrealistic. And if the department's saying we need until March, we support that. It doesn't affect the impacts dramatically. And it potentially just means that the policy itself has a chance to really do what it's meant to do without a lot of confusion and potential chaos, especially given everything that DOC is dealing with. So that's what I had testified to on earned good time. I can stop there and answer questions if that's helpful.
No, we obviously will make a decision when they finally pass a bill, but I'm concerned the longer you delay it, the more pressure is on particularly from folks who are incarcerated, and you're just adding to their sentences. So, I could see to January 1st might be my preference, but we will have to make a decision once they pass something. Anybody else a comment on the good time? Okay. I'm concerned about the working group because I know that it's always good to have a working group, but I hope it's a working group and not a group that's, I hope it's more like the group that we had to develop justice reinvestment than that can arrive at consensus.
I can say on that piece, so the composition and a lot of the specifics of that working group, as we recommended it originally to the House, was all informed by colleagues of mine who have worked in many states to help implement justice reinvestment. And the reason that they offered to me about why establishing something like that in statute or just sort of having that be very clearly defined as part of justice reinvestment is that the experience that we've had over the last 8 or so years in implementing these types of policy changes is that if there isn't a cross systems group of people who represent the leadership and the staff who are most involved in the implementation of those policies, and if that's not very clearly defined, that there's sort of a group of folks who are ultimately responsible for at least receiving information and guiding that work, that then what can happen is all of the siloing that's sort of inevitable and universally true in any state within different departments or agencies, that sort of becomes the way implementation plays out too. And so, you've got some agencies or departments who might be really bought in and they absolutely heavily invest in the implementation of the policies, and others who might not be. And when there's just a place or an entity that's saying, and that has buy-in from those departments and agencies as well, because they're represented on it, there's just more accountability for actually making sure that the policies work the way that they're meant to. So that informed, the long list of people, and I think it's all up for discussion. And I also know that there's some language in that working group and what the group would be doing that could be interpreted in a way that might be providing way too much oversight on what's going on in different departments. And all of that should be refined to make the most sense. But the general goal is, and we've talked about this before, and you all know this, that no one department owns any of these issues. And the people who move through the Department of Corrections inevitably are dealing with issues or needs or services that are cross systems in nature. And so the more that you have that working group that's sort of representative of that, the better there is for that kind of coordination that makes the policies work.
Okay, well, I'm not sure if I'm reading section 23 right. Is there another section that deals with the working group? Because that's a really short section.
Let me pull it up. I'm scrolling.
Yes, there is. There's section 22, which is the Justice Reinvestment 2 working group.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you. I think one of the things that I need to understand is how would this be, since it's got legislators on it, how's this different from the Justice Oversight Committee? Where does the two, I'm assuming that the Justice Oversight Committee would still be actively involved in policy. And how does this interact with that? I think I have a number of questions about this, and I don't want to, I'm not sure you wouldn't want to, anyway. I don't know how deeply committee members want to get in. Oh, by the way, Senator Benning is not available, but he is live streaming. And we wish him well in his recovery and hope he's feeling a lot better. So, Joe, we miss you and we'll see you next week, I hope. But I know he is live streaming us and probably saying things to himself right now. Maybe I should listen to some of the witnesses about the working group, but right now I'm a little confused as to how it would interact with the Justice Oversight Committee and how it would interact. It's a good idea to have some involvement there, but am I missing something, Bryn?
No, you're not. For the record, Bryn here from Legislative Council. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
So I think that there's this, I would just start out by saying that this language was drafted based on a document provided from the Justice Center that provided some details. There's a lot of details that still need to be filled in this section. And one of them is refining the dates that this working group is scheduled to report to the General Assembly and to who they should report. Right now, the date doesn't make a lot of sense. It's January 15th of next year. They're scheduled to report to the standing committees. And just, I can tell you briefly in the discussion that we've had in the House, that date is likely going to be pushed back to 2022, perhaps in the fall, and they would report to the Justice Oversight Committee. But obviously those are decisions that still need to be made. So I see that as how it would interact with the Justice Oversight Committee. It's different because it has members from all three branches of state government, not just legislators. And I think that the idea is that it does this work and then reports to the General Assembly.
The other thing I'll say really quick on that date for you all is that the sticking point when we read that January 15th, 2021 reporting language, it was mostly that what's written now is that the working group would report on legislative recommendations. And most of these policies will have only been implemented for about 14 days at that point. So having legislative recommendations by 2021 in January didn't seem reasonable. But I don't think it's a bad idea that there be a report to the Joint Justice Oversight Committee on implementation progress by January and kind of what the working group has done and what they've seen as they've started to stand up those policies. But specifically asking for legislative recommendations felt like there just wouldn't be the time to get what you all are really looking for by at least January.
Well, what comes off the top of my head is why not reinstitute the working group we had prior to the legislation of S338 and just continue that working group. It seemed to work pretty well. It was, a very a group with an awful lot of members, and I would think the easiest thing would just to be to reconstitute that working group with an assignment to help with the implementation of the bill, of the legislation and of the Justice Reinvestment too. And you have, all the various people involved in that, from mental health to domestic violence, the ACLU, all of the members of the actual working group that developed it in the first place. Seems to me, it doesn't have to be the same members, but seemed to me that would be a simpler way to do all this.
It's almost the same list of folks too. The one that I would point out that I think would be an important addition to that group would be the parole board, given presumptive parole. But it is almost. I mean, exactly
we could always just add the parole board, and that was somewhat of an oversight in the first place. I think if I look back on it, that we didn't add them to the working group. But anyway, well, that's just my thoughts on it. And so, Bryn, as you're drafting for the House, maybe as you think about what might be an amendment from the Senate, if you think about the working group we first had, that we had to develop justice reinvestment, that would be working together to help implement justice reinvestment. I think, and this goes to the committee that Alice is on with Senator Campion and Senator Westman, I think the biggest problem that we're going to face is how you implement justice reinvestment 2 while you're reopening a system, the judicial system and other branches of government that have been at best meeting remotely and putting a lot of tough decisions off. I'm particularly concerned about a surge. I spoke with Commissioner Baker about it yesterday, a surge that comes when you open the spigot in the courts of all, I've noticed so many people who've been released on conditions who might otherwise have gone to jail, and how that's going to be dealt with when they come to court. And I've noticed also, obviously, a lot of people have been released. Some about 300 people have. We've reduced the prison population by 300. So those are the things I'm concerned with. Jim, maybe you could build on that.
Hey, good morning, Senator. Good morning to the committee. I hope I didn't realize that Senator Benning was not there and ill. And if he's listening, I hope he's doing well. Let me just.
By the
so
way,
let me
it's
just-
not COVID-19 related.
Yeah,
Just
I hear you. I hear you. Let me just step back based on what I just heard Ellen say and what you're saying, Senator, is that I kind of want to just talk about from the overview, bigger picture. I think where the challenge for corrections is going to come is it's pretty descriptive on the policy changes around furlough and good time and all that. And it's one thing to have it in legislation. It's another thing to have the rubber meet the road where the supervision is done. And I think my concern, and you've heard me say this before, and I just feel like I have to repeat it. If we don't have those services in the community, the population we're supervising is pretty challenging. And so, again, good time furlough, the changes, we're not quivering over that. We support it. What I think the real conversation is the way this is going to look out in the field for supervision. And that brings up a lot of challenges inside corrections, which, I won't get into right now, but my concern with all of this in the current language, when I start adding up the number of reports we're going to have to do, there's at least 2 reports in the capital budget. There's a report in the budget adjustment that we've already missed. I read here, I kind of lost track in here, the number of reports that are generated out of this bill that are going to require staff time focused on gathering data. So I'll use racial disparity as one example. Even though someone else is responsible for that, it's our data that's going to require to do that. And then you layer a couple other committees like Section 20, a working committee inside corrections, and then 22, yet another committee. I just want to emphasize that I'm supportive of finding a way to bring people to the table to implement the policies. But if we spend all our time talking about implementing the policies, we won't have time in the field to change culturally some of the things that corrections is doing to a better model of a community-based correctional system, because that's really what we're trying to get to. I'm really troubled by 22, and I'm troubled because the language is almost prescriptive about directing corrections, how to run corrections. And one of the things I've discovered since I've been here is some of that prescription that goes into corrections snuffs out creativity inside corrections. If you're just robotic and following what you're told to do, it snuffs out the creativity that I think we have inside corrections, and has clearly been demonstrated through the pandemic. A little bit of bragging here for a minute, but a court case that came out yesterday, you all saw it, clearly states that the creativity inside corrections when it came to the pandemic it is unprecedented. And so what I'm worried about is the more oversight and the several levels of oversight is going to create a situation where we're not allowed to create that creativity with the professionals on the ground that know the business. Now, with that said, Senator, I would not push back against the idea of the original group working as an oversight implementation, working with corrections to do that. I'm just concerned about that Section 22 language in there is talking about case reviews, and quite candidly, that is not the role of a group like that. That's corrections' job. And so I'm concerned about the way that is, and I'm concerned about some of the deadlines and concerned about the number of reports that we're going to be involved in that are going to bog us down. So that's on Section 22 in the committees, because when I look at think it's section 20, directing a working group inside corrections around programming. It's just, I mean, you feel like you're being pulled in 15 different directions here without a focus that we can get focused inside corrections to create the programming in the community that's going to support the spirit and the intent of reinvestment, which again, I want to reemphasize, 100% supportive of the concept as the commissioner. And I think it presents us an opportunity to really rethink the way we do business in the field with better outcomes. So I'll stop there just for any questions. And then I know you wanted me to share with the committee some of the conceptual, and it really is conceptual right now, but I'm more than happy. In fact, I emailed Ellen this morning wanting to grab some of her time and David's time to chit chat about this focused deterrence idea. But again, I'll stop there just on the points I'm making about yet how many working groups can we manage inside corrections is what my concern.
Well, that's a good point, Commissioner. Although I will say that the report that was due that we missed, and we obviously missed because when we put the pandemic, when we put the report together, there wasn't a pandemic.
Right.
And what the report was about was community services. And I think right now that report is all the more important because if we don't have community services available, when the surge hits, there's only one other place for them to go, and that's inside the walls.
Yeah,
And so
I don't
I
disagree.
think of all the reports that we've required over the years, that may be the most important to get us through this problem that I anticipate, and I'm sure you do. I know there's a pent up group of people who are scheduled to come into court sometime in June. It's going to be just a rush, and I don't know how defenders and prosecutors are going to handle it, but if past practice is any indication, a lot of them will end up in jail, even though they've been out for a month or two. So
I agree. And I will tell you, I don't have statistical data in front of me, but just watching the reports from the field offices every day, there's clearly an uptick in domestics.
And I would add to that without that report, the report was what community services would be available with the $2 million that we had put in one-time funds that no longer exist, by the way.
Right.
But how do we make sure that that money is allocated and make sure that we have the community resources available? So it may be that it's pandemic related and could be part of the 1.25 billion, but certainly that to me was critical. So any comments from other committee members or from Ellen about Senator Baruth and then Senator White?
I just wanted to second Commissioner Baker. I feel this way every time, frankly, I look at something that comes back to us from the House. I always feel that it's overloaded with reports, commissions, committees. It's just a different legislative worldview, I think. And I think it might be a good idea to hold the line and try to shoot for fewer of all of those categories in this bill.
Senator, I appreciate that because, you all know I've been around state government a long time, and I've been in front of many committees over the years, been directed to write a lot of reports. And again, I'm not trying to belittle the work of the legislative process, but my experience is those reports do little to change directions on what I think you're all trying to do here that we support. I really do think that we have an opportunity, especially as a result of the pandemic, inside corrections, to really think about what a correctional system would look like that'll look much different 5 years from now than it does right now. And I think the pandemic, there's a very clear connection in my mind, culturally inside corrections. I'm watching the culture inside corrections change in front of me as a result of the work we're doing on the pandemic for a whole host of reasons in a whole host of areas. So I appreciate those comments, Senator, because I'd rather get to the work instead of writing a report, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm still, from my perspective, Commissioner, I want to make clear that I'm not opposed to having a working group to work with mental health, work with the
Mhm.
community groups that were involved in the original working group. I just think we could do it similar to that group, which I thought worked very well together and developed strategies. And I felt we were working well together. And if the Justice Center's willing to continue to work with us on the implementation of that, then I think that's something that I would definitely support. I don't disagree with you. I don't think we need dozens of reports that tell us what we should already know. And I also, on the other hand, listening Monday to a report that you wrote on Bennington PD, sometimes reports have value.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I
So
agree.
I don't mean to turn it on to
That's-
you, but
that was my other consulting life, Senator.
right.
No-
So
Notice I'm not talking about that now because I'm in.
no, I know you're in a different position, but I will say that report had a great deal of value. So
Yeah, but I think, again, because I don't want to belabor this, but I think the difference in a report done by a consulting group is much different than sometimes reports that are done in state government because you're just trying to meet the deadline. And look, to go back to what you said, I as commissioner, and I'm saying this without, verifying this with folks that I answer to, but I would fully support what you just said. I mean, the original working group to me appeared to be, when I walked in the door in January, a cohesive group that was working on a direction to go in. I'm afraid all these other working groups just become bureaucratic and a distraction and not focused on where we're all trying to get to. Because we may have a difference opinion on a few things here and there, but I think we all agree that we're looking for better outcomes as a result of folks we're supervising in the community to make them better citizens and not have them return to jail. I think we're all on the same page there.
Senator White, did you have a question or comment?
No, I was just going to say that oftentimes we require reports, and reports have a certain meaning to them for people, but really what we want are updates, not necessarily reports. So I think that by using the word report, it puts a weight on it that isn't necessary. And what we really want are updates. And I think that, so I just wanted to make that comment because we, in our committee, we've kind of stopped using reports so much and just asked for updates.
I'll just say to that point, Senator, in what we had originally put forth as a recommendation for a working group or things like this, it was full of the word report because that's sort of what we think of too, is we use it more as a verb than a noun, report out on this. And I talked to Monica Weaver from DOC, and she was like, that typically means a 20-page report that I have to write, and so we tried to change some of that language to update as well. And I would just say, to your point, Senator Sears, about the first working group, I don't think any of the legislation that established, or the executive order that established that working group, had any language around reports on it. But every working group meeting contained a tremendous amount of information that was discussed and brought to that working group. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that to continue without necessarily specifying that a department, which then means, a couple of staff, have to devote all the resources to producing something like a report.
I appreciate that. Matt Valerio has been waiting to comment, and I've been watching his kitchen window, waiting for the moose to show up, but so far they haven't. So Matt, go ahead.
We're no moose, no nothing yet. I agree with Jim Baker on this one, and we tend to do this actually the agreement part somewhat regularly, but I think it's probably important to identify some key measures that would be indicators of success and have DOC report back to the Justice Oversight Joint Committee on what those measures are, as opposed to having a gaggle of people together and doing a big report. We're pretty tight right now. as well. And we anticipate a large wave of cases coming in from cases that were deferred from arraignments and probation violations. And then on the other side, issues in Prisoners' Rights Office. So, we're actually anticipating, and I think that the committee recognizes this, a huge influx of work coming in the next 6 months. And I'm not saying we can't get this done, but I think our time's better spent addressing this wave of cases that comes in. And, if we can identify and if the Council for State Governments could perhaps assist in saying, look, if we can identify these 3 measures as, what's happening with these, maybe it's 5 measures, I don't know what it is, and have a report back to the Justice Oversight Committee, we're probably doing a lot better getting where we want to go.
Thank you. I just want to reemphasize later on this morning, we'll hear from the judiciary about some of their needs regarding COVID-19 funding. And I'm hoping that both the Defender General, the state's attorneys, the Corrections Department, and others will let us know what those are. I plan to take that up next week. And I'm really concerned, and I don't want to go back to the report, Jim, but that particular report on what you need in the community in order to in order to accomplish 2 goals. One is keeping people out of jail. Number 2 is public safety. How we accomplish both those issues at a time when we just lost all the one-time money that was going to be attributed to justice reinvestment, future payback. And so I really want to make sure we reinvest that $2 million, even though we don't have it. And it may need to be creative in finding it, but I can't remember off the top of my head. And I know Stephanie Barrett and Bryn have the information on how we saw that $2 million, but that was really that report. And if we can just look at that, continue to look at that, because without that investment in the community, we are going to be sending many of those people back to jail.
Yeah, Senator, we will, again, we obviously did not ignore that by design.
No, I know you didn't.
We were in the,
obviously.
Something
else happened.
Yeah, I'm hoping, I think the other challenge we face is this is conversations happening inside corrections around COVID-19. I mean, there are folks that have a lot of credibility that are talking about we could be back to this whole situation again in September.
Yeah.
And this is labor intensive. So what I'm gonna give you my word on, senators, I'm gonna recircle back on the language on that April 1st report that was in the budget adjustment and get back to you on putting something together. It may not be our best shot, but putting something together that will start to address. And I think it also ties in partly to the conversation I had with you yesterday on the concept of focus.
Maybe you want to raise that now and then we'll hear from Falco.
But this is, so for the folks, and even inside corrections, I haven't floated this idea the way I probably should have. So I know a couple of my staff are on the line. Monica and Dal are on now, and I briefly touched on this with them this morning. Some of the work that was done when I was the police chief in Rutland was around focused deterrence. And it's work that was done primarily by some folks, Anthony Braga from Harvard University, David Kennedy out of John Jay. And the strategy that was put in place around Project Vision was based on focused deterrence. And we had someone from corrections embedded inside the police department that looked at the highest risk folks that were causing the most harm in the community. And then we really wrap services around those individuals. But the focused deterrence piece is really making folks understand, here's a wraparound service, services that are gonna help you specifically because you have an underlying issue, for example, of a pre-existing mental health issue, or you have an opiate addiction problem. And here's the services. That's where the methadone clinic became a big part of the conversation. But the focused deterrence piece was that the entire weight of the community was there to support the individual, with the understanding, if they didn't take advantage of that, that there's going to be consequences. And the theory behind focused deterrences is that it's less about how long the sentence is for a violation or how long you're put into a sanction. The fact is that what the studies show is the quickness and how fast it happens in conjunction with being out of bounds. With being out of bounds is the most effective way to get folks' attention. So I haven't flushed this out yet, but I also shared with you, I mean, I'm looking at a chart that I put on a flip chart here in my office that really looks very much like the spoken hub model when it comes to opiate addiction. And the concept of wrapping those services around high-risk individuals in the community, I think would have an impact. And I think it goes back to your point, Senator, about you really now need to figure out where could we do demonstration sites in the state where the services are there and we could demo if this would be effective or not. And again, to me, it's less about people going back to jail. It's more about taking folks from being good inmates to good citizens and having the support that they need so that they can be productive and raise public safety in given communities. So it's very conceptual right now, but I've had a little bit of time in the last week as things have slowed down a little bit to really start to think about what would a correctional system look like that looks different today, that's more effective. And so I know that's very conceptual, but that's what you and I spoke about yesterday.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions for Falco? You've been waiting on, and any comments on what we've been talking about?
Yeah, and thank you for Falco Schilling, Advocacy Director for the ACLU of Vermont. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Testimony is going to be pretty short because I think you've covered a lot of the ground that I wanted to weigh in on. This came after the Corrections Institutions Committee put this amendment into the bill. We sent them and shared with your committee just our desire to continue to be part of the Justice Reinvestment Working Group if that were to move forward. So the suggestions have been put forward today to reinstitute the original group, something we would agree with and I think would be very helpful. Just being part of that group, it's something I think, as folks have mentioned, was helpful to have everyone at the table to be part of that conversation early. And I think did help create some alignment in terms of the goals we were trying to achieve and having some of those conversations earlier, bringing a more fleshed out work product to the legislature. And it was something that we appreciate being part of that process and think to help create a strong bill. So that's just our pitch to continue to be part of that working group moving forward in whatever form that it looks like. Beyond that, in terms of the reports and the discussion of the reports, we would also be fine if those were changed to updates. We of course want to be able to get the information that's necessary to evaluate how these programs are being implemented, but it's much less about how that's packaged and more about providing that information in a way that's useful to legislators and to the general public so they can understand how these changes are being implemented. And another thing that has been talked about a little bit today that could possibly be made a little bit more explicit is we would like to know more just about the work that has been done in corrections. From hearing from the commissioner on multiple occasions, there have been changes in the community supervision system, which is one of the biggest focuses of this bill, and how graduated sanctions have been used. And that has led to a decline in the number of people who are incarcerated. So making sure as we move forward through this crisis and hopefully past this crisis, we can learn the lessons from what was done and see what was really helpful, see what changes might need to be made, and then apply that to how we implement this bill moving forward. So appreciate that information, but we want to make sure that we're capturing what has been done throughout this crisis and having that available to inform future decisions. So I think that's about all we had to say on the good time piece. We would also like to see good time in place as soon as possible for the folks that are incarcerated, and share some of your concerns about that, but also do recognize that the current reality has put a strain on resources. So would say that we would like to have that in place as soon as practical, but also understand that sometimes when unrealistic dates for rules are put into statute, they just aren't met in the first place anyway. So want to make sure that we put realistic deadlines in place that can be achieved from within the department. So that's all I really had to bring to the table today, but happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, Falco? Thank you so much. Appreciate that testimony.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Judge Grierson, any comments?
Just briefly, Senator, thank you. Good morning to the committee. For the record, Brian Grierson, Chief Superior Judge. I really can't disagree with anything that has been said by the Commissioner or Falco or Defender General. We are going to have obviously a significant backlog in cases that were, at midpoint before the pandemic hit, and the cases that have been built up over the course of this pandemic. And we are really going to be in a new criminal justice world, or a new judicial world in terms of the backlog in all of the dockets. And it's going to be a real transition when we get started. It'll be more of an evolution of what we think we can start with. The Supreme Court is now in the process of creating a plan to reopen the courts. A lot of it is going to depend not only on the backlog coming in, which we know is going to be significant, but the ability to hold hearings in the various courthouses. And by that, I mean, with social distancing, the physical space in some of the courthouses, in the courtrooms, is going to be a brand new obstacle. So
yeah, I think we get to that in a little later in the agenda, the specifics to how you're gonna. I know I did read over the request for funding from that Pat Gable submitted to the committee, and it's quite interesting how you're going to have a jury trial without them sitting next to each other.
yeah, it'll be interesting.
At least they won't be able to whisper.
No, they won't. But I think from a report standpoint, I guess my real point is we are going to be so involved, meaning the state, the prosecution, defense, corrections, and just processing cases in this new world, that I don't know if we'll have the resources available to do a lot of the reports that are called for presently. I think the idea of updating the legislature in the progress that is being made is important and should be done, but probably not in the working group model that we've been using, at least for the next year. It's going to be extremely difficult to allocate resources in that area. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. David Scher, do you have any comments for the Attorney General's office?
Thank you. I don't have a lot to add to what's been said. I think I don't disagree with a lot of the points that have been made with respect to Justice Reinvestment 2 working group. Just thinking conceptually, it does seem like the legislature tells the executive what its job is, the executive does its job, and having another group that's also doing that job does seem like a construct that may not be especially helpful. Certainly no opposition to making these reports more explicitly updates. And with respect to this hasn't been a point of controversy, I don't think, but just we do appreciate the addition of the racial disparities panel on that Section 19 report dealing with racial disparities. Again, if there needs to be some adjustment with respect to updates and timelines on that, certainly there's no opposition to that.
Ellen, any comments? Again, I'm pleased that the Justice Center is willing to stay involved with us in this process. So, and I know there's been some change in the staff that originally did the first report on justice reinvestment, and we wish them all well, but we're glad you're still with us.
Yep, I'm not going anywhere. If anything, I'll do as much as I can for Vermont for as long as they'll let me. So no, I think this is all characteristically reasonable, and the intention of everything is in line with what we would recommend. So however you all see fit to make that real in the legislation makes sense to us.
Great. And as I said earlier, for David Scher and for Judge Gerson's also coming, but Jim Baker and others, if somebody for next week or the week after can help us with whatever you're going to be facing when Judge Gerson opens his spigot a little bit on the courts. I suspect it's going to be a similar rollout as we've seen statewide, but it's going to create things for the defense, for the prosecution, for the corrections department, and everybody else involved in the justice system. So please let us know. We're trying to provide advice to the appropriations committees, as well as a special committee that Senator Nick is a member of, which is looking at opening up and what do you need to open up. So that's chaired by Senator Campion and Westman. Is there any committee members with any comments or questions, or I didn't ask for Dale or Monica who have stood by, but any comments from either of you?
No, I'm good. You spoke with the commissioner. He speaks for the department, so no comments here.
Yeah, same for me. I think the commissioner
Okay.
said it very, very well.
Okay. Well, I'm specifically interested in further looking at your ideas regarding collaborative work with other groups regarding the field services. That would make a tremendous change in how we can deal with people in the community. And thank you all for being here. I see it's clouding over, Jim, so the sun is gone.
Yep, we got our dose of sun here in the.
We did in the sunny south.
In the sunny south yesterday, Senator.
Right. I was at a meeting and I stepped out for a little while and came back in, and everybody was shivering from the north at the. And I said, "Gee, it's 65 down here. It's beautiful and sunny. A little cool breeze, but other than that,
yeah, we're swimming in Lake. We're swimming in Lake
crazy.
Perrin already, right, Senator?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you all very much. We're going to take a 5-minute break and get back and talk about DUI civil suspension hearings, and that's a piece of legislation. So
Okay.
Peggy, if you want to get us back at 11.
Yep, sounds good. I'm going to mute
Does that
everyone and then
work?
I'm going to come back at 11.
Thank you all very much. Oh, the systems. The more I learn about this, the more I, oh, we got a chat. Okay. Yesterday, I learned how to put up a blue hand, which was totally new to me. So, every day is a new
I know.
adventure.
After you figured it out, I tried to figure it out too, so that was good.
How to do
So
what?
now we put up a blue hand.
That you want to be recognized.
I know, but if you, in order to do that, the person that is running the meeting has to have their participant list there.
Right.
And when I have my participant list, then I can't see the participants.
That's true.
So I think just
I
putting your
like our
hand like this.
I
is-
like our current system.
I do
pretty good.
too.
So we have a DUI language proposal, and as soon as Bryn's available, we'll restart the meeting.
Is this from the House or is this ours?
This is ours, but it was, if you remember, when we passed our second bill, we had a DUI section so that when somebody was picked up for DUI, the civil suspension wouldn't be effective because they weren't able to hold the hearing that the person deserves within a certain time frame. And those
Right.
timeframes were eliminated. So it was Matt Valerio's suggestion that we do something about that. When it got over to the House Transportation Committee and the Department of Motor Vehicles had some concerns about the section. So to make it easier, we took the section out of whatever that bill was. And this is our replacement language that I think is acceptable to DMV and other groups except the state's attorneys who have an addition regarding CDL licenses. So with that, I'd turn it over to Bryn to just kind of briefly go over what the new version is from what we had passed previously.
Very
Okay.
good.
Yep.
So hello again, committee. For the record, Bryn Hare from Legislative Council. That was really a great introduction to this language. Hopefully you all have it. It's just free floating language. It's not attached to any bill currently. So it's draft 1.1. The date is April 29th at 12:21 p.m. So the difference between this language and what you looked at in S114 is that this language would only suspend those statutory timeframes for DUI license suspension hearings for DUIs 1 and 2 if the person requests a hearing. And it only prohibits that license suspension until the hearing occurs for DUI 1 and 2. So that means that the court and the DMV operations would continue as provided under statute for third and subsequent DUI offenses. And additionally, because it has that language in there about the person, if a person requests a hearing, then the hearing is suspended. If the person chooses not to have a hearing, then that civil suspension would proceed as provided under statute for DUIs 1 and 2. So that was intended to address some of the concerns that were raised by the DMV about public safety by having those DUIs 3 and subsequent carry on as provided under statute, and also provide that if the person doesn't request a hearing, then that civil suspension can continue and access to the ignition interlock program can continue for DUIs 1 and 2. So hopefully that's clear to everybody.
Yep.
Let me know if there's questions.
Are there
So,
any questions for Bryn? Alice?
so I'm just wondering, I can't remember if it's a number 2, what is the time frame? Is this say you had a 1 20 years ago, is there any time frame like that? And then you had a second one. Is there anything like that that's in place, or it's just if you ever had one in your life and then you're on number 2?
Yes, so that was a recent addition that I think you guys worked on that last year.
Yeah.
And I believe the time frame is 20 years. I'm sure Heather will correct me if I'm wrong about that. But I believe it's 20 years. If you don't have another within 20 years, then you go back to having and you get another one, it's a DUI 1. But if within 20 years you get a second one, then it becomes a DUI 2. Heather, please correct me if I'm wrong about that, but that's my recollection without having looked at the statute recently.
Okay.
That's
Heather?
don't have anyone
Go ahead.
within 20 years. It goes defaults to a 1. And then once you have one within 20 years, all your priors count subsequent to 91.
Wait, say that latter part again, please.
So if you had, so today's 2020. So if you had a DUI in 1999 and then you picked up a DUI today, that would be a DUI number 1. But then if you picked up another DUI in 2021, your 99 now comes back in and it's a 3. You just have to have 1 within 20 years.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Now, Heather, the state's attorneys. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Senator White.
I was just gonna say, although I understand why our DUI laws seem very draconian. I mean, somebody has a 19-year-old and then now they're 39 and they have 1. Anyway, I just think they're very draconian.
Well, and we tried to make improvements last year, and someday we'll probably make more improvements, but right now I would agree in terms of looking at the past for a lot of people who may have, when they were teenagers, gotten a DUI and then in their 40s get one. And the fact that the one from their teenage years can come back if they have a second one and becomes a third, that's a little, yeah. But it was, it was an improvement from what it was. We're still an outlier in terms of using past DUIs. And in some states like New York, it gets confusing because it's a civil suspension and first offense over there, not a criminal. So if you have one in Vermont, then is that is that your second? Anyhow, Heather, you were going to speak on behalf of the state's attorneys. There was a concern expressed regarding people who hold a CDL license. Did you want to comment on that?
So there was a concern that because the suspensions for CDLs are separate to your personal license, but they are kind of parallel with it, and it's set by a federal standard. So the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act is what sets those suspensions. And we were concerned if we changed the timing on it, meaning that how our suspensions go in place and left the 2 open until the hearing, that we could jeopardize federal funds. I have now since been able to be in touch with the National Traffic Law Center, their subject matter expert on CDLs, and she informed me that as long as the suspension goes in place at the time of the conviction, that we shouldn't be in any issue with funding. So that would need to be in place. We were just concerned.
Okay. Matt Valerio, any comments on this?
I'm fine with how it came out, because our key to this was that you don't want to be depriving somebody of a license without a hearing. And this provides that that's exactly what's going on with the 1s and 2s, and with the above 2s, they get their hearing or they keep their license. So it is fine as it is.
Okay. Mike Smith, did you want to comment for the Department of Motor Vehicles?
Hi, this is Mike Smith, and I turned the camera on because I do have Wanda Manoli, but you can only see her.
Oh my gosh, you are socially distanced. You're doubly distanced.
I'm wearing a mask.
Oh, all
So,
right.
I'm gonna, just first on the language, you know, we've been talking about this because of the Administrative Order 49 with Judiciary. And that I want to say that I really appreciate the opportunity last week to discuss this with the committee and to have some communication on the proposed language between Bryn and the chair of Senate Judiciary. I think that it's a balance. I think the language is a balance with the administrative order that came out of 49. I appreciate that you're hearing DMV's concerns and that the way the language is drafted, you know, that there's it's suspension of suspension for 1s and 2s if they choose to go to a hearing. Otherwise, the language, we move forward with the statute as it is outlined. And I would like to have Mike just quickly talk about the CDL, if you don't mind.
No.
Okay.
So from the CDL perspective, the state of Vermont is required to issue a disqualification of the CDL privileges upon receipt of a conviction. So my read of this statute is that it's kind of delaying the conviction. So on your 3s and 4s, when the conviction comes in, we're going to take appropriate action. On your 1s and 2s, if the hearing is delayed and the conviction does not show up, then I am under no obligation to issue a disqualification because there's been no conviction. Hence, there should be no impact on federal funding or compliance with the CDL program.
Good. So, by the way, I just so you know that your system is working. I did get my registration back on the date that it expired, and so your system your system is working fine.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
As far as registrations go.
Well, remember, behind that system is a lot of people power still.
Yes.
Yep.
And they're working,
Yep.
which I'm ever so thankful to work with such a great group of dedicated people. I mean, we have been here working, we do have some staggered shifts, some alternative shifts, but every day. So, and Mike was sending me a note. I just want you to know I got distracted. and so I'm glad it did. I'm going to encourage all of you and with your constituents, continue going online for your renewal or your license renewal or mail in because we are moving these really quickly.
No, I was surprised at the turnaround given the situation. So I was late sending it in. And so to have it back on the day that it was expired was pretty good.
We planned that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Good for you, Mike. Well, anyway, thank you both for all you're doing. All of you, actually.
Thank you, Senator.
That includes you, Judge, and Matt and Heather, too.
Yeah, I just wanted, yes, for the record, again, Brian Grierson, Chief Superior Judge, just wanted to remind the committee as well as the other folks involved that at this point, the Supreme Court has not identified civil suspension hearings as an emergency hearing that would go ahead.
Right.
So as
Right.
you're
So
looking at this legislation.
I've noticed that there have been, and this would, which is why we're doing this in the first place.
Right.
Great. Any other comments? Do we want to fashion this into a bill that could be dealt with? I mean, obviously, it's something that.
Is there anything else you could attach it to?
Not really. At this point, the problem is, you could have disputes about whether or not, given that the hearing can't be held, where the person could actually end up with their DUI dismissed. So and plus it does recognize that you are innocent until proven guilty. At least you've had a hearing. So is there a motion to, I guess right now we're creating new bills, Bryn?
Are we?
Yes,
I
my
think that's what
understanding,
Senator White's committee's been doing.
yep, with a committee, in a committee bill format.
Yep. So I would move a report this favorably. Is there any discussion? Senator Baruth? Okay. Is there any further discussion of the issue? Peggy, could you call the roll, please?
Sorry, I wasn't ready. I might not do the right order, but we'll take the roll.
Don't worry about that.
Okay. Senator White,
Yes.
Senator Baruth,
Yes.
Senator Nitka,
Yes.
Senator Sears,
Yes, and Senator Benning is absent, so it'll be 4-0-1.
I have an update from Senator Benning if you'd like to hear it.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, he says 7 stitches under my tongue on the left side,
Ugh.
which has blown up like a balloon. Hurts like hell to talk. On the good side, Deb's enjoying the quiet.
Well, get well soon. Thank you for the update, Senator Baruth, and get well soon, Senator Benning. And I'm sure he's still writing though, so that's the good news. Thank you. So I don't know what we need to do. We have permission from the Rules Committee to move forward with the bill, so I guess you just, the Senate provides a bill number.
Yep.
And we could report it as early as tomorrow, I think.
I think, Bryn, you probably already know this, but you need to send it to drafting and copy Senator Sears on it. And
Yes.
I'll get a copy
And then,
and post it.
and then Senator Sears, you have to, from your email, send it to
Send it
John
to
Bloomer.
John Bloomer. Okay,
Mhm.
I will do that.
And to Nadine, you have to
Ooh.
also authorize,
I'll-
Bryn will let you know.
Oh, okay.
I'll send you an email with the steps.
Okay, thank you, Brent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much on this one. Is there any, it's kind of a new world for me. But I will report the bill, hopefully tomorrow. If I'm not, I do have my wife has to go to the dentist at 8 a.m. to get a tooth removed. And if I'm not there by 9:30, could somebody else report the bill if it's up?
Do you need
Senator
anything
Nitka
from
is
me?
vice chair. Would you? Huh?
Do you need
Well, we're
anything
hoping-
from me?
No, I'm just hoping that somebody else can pick my wife up at the dentist. Because she has to be put out in order to have the extraction. So if I'm not there at 9:30 tomorrow morning, somebody else could. Okay, so you could send Senator Nitka and myself a summary of the bill, Bryn, please.
That'd
Sure,
be good.
I will do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to switch to the judiciary's budget. They presented, maybe you want to find that first. Peggy, do you have that document? Is it on our committee page?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so. Okay, so you have it's a memo from Pat Gable. All they're asking for is, as I read it, $5,462,000 in 2020 and $4,040,000 in 2021. I don't know that we want to deal with the 2021 budget today. I don't think we're dealing with 2021 until next year, or until in appropriations. Our first step will be the one-time money out of the COVID-19 fund, and then she's got FY20 ongoing, which I assume is your budget adjustment request. Am I correct in that, Pat? You're muted, Pat. We can't hear you. Pat, you're muted.
Sorry, I just joined you, Senator, so I didn't hear the question that you asked.
We have your summary of costs, and you may want to go over the whole memo, but we've got your memo. And this will be recommendations to the Appropriations Committee regarding your request. I'm questioning whether we should do the FY21 today or hold off on that, since they're going to be dealing with that at a later time.
Yes, I would agree with that in terms of FY21.
The budget adjustment bill. Obviously, you can mention FY21, but you have ongoing of about 615,000, but you have 4,847,000 in one time, which I assume is part of the COVID-19 CARES Act money.
Yes, this entire recommendation, we believe qualifies under COVID-19. So I haven't yet had a read from Joint Fiscal, which we may get now, but our proposal is that it would all be covered by the COVID-19 funding.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the 2021, but Stephanie would certainly know more about that.
Yeah, right now the funding goes through December 31. And so part of the FY21 may not fall into that category, which is why I agree. FY21 is a little out there for us in terms of our estimates. So it's probably more helpful right now to talk about the FY20, which is a combination of one-time funding and then ongoing in FY20, which equals $5,462,000. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to go through the memo, there's a summary and a description with items, but then there's an appendix at the end with a summary of costs, which is simply a summary of the costs contained in the memo.
Yep. Okay. So maybe we should go over the memo to begin with, so we understand how you plan to keep the jurors apart or other things.
Well, as you know, I mean, in the legislature, you've had a similar issue.
Right.
It's an exciting challenge to figure that out and do it in real time. And the judicial emergency, part of our judicial emergency declared by the Supreme Court, has a complete suspension of jury trials. And as you know, that creates constitutional constraints. So the judiciary is eager to move forward to make the changes that it can to open up the system beyond what it's doing right now. Just to remind people, the court system has not closed, and we continue to have all but one courthouse open. But what open means is something very different from what it normally means. And so open means that there is skeleton staffing, that judges come in when they're needed to come in, that if we do have a video hearing, we have to have someone there taking the record. We have security, and security now is not just the typical security you think of, which is about weapons and the like, but now it's about health as well. And we continue to accept filings. We continue to accept emergency cases. And so the court in its administrative order 49 had identified which emergency cases we would hear. And of those emergency cases, which of those can we do by video or audio, which is as many as we possibly can, and which need to be done in person. So that's the situation we're in now. We obviously have, we're not doing Judicial Bureau cases at all. We're doing only very limited civil cases. I think we've talked before about what's in the emergency list. And so everyone is eager to start working on that backlog. The other item in the backlog will be COVID related cases that we've already heard and we'll probably continue to hear for some time to come. So in my memo, as I identified, the first category on page 1 is safe spaces for judiciary staff and participants in court proceedings. This will involve not only all the usual social distancing issues you would expect and the wearing of masks and the use of gloves and the like, but it also means that we need to really redesign and reconfigure our workspaces and identify which buildings are even have the capacity for us to operate in them in an expanded way. And so we've identified, for example, someone we would bring on who would have the specific responsibility of evaluating the buildings and also evaluating what we can do to create safe spaces. That would include reusing workspaces. Right now, you know, we have, any of you who've ever been in our clerk's offices know the desks can be very close together and the like. And that's something that we need to change. And we're currently working on that now, looking at partitions, transparent partitions, not just between workers and public who might come to the courthouse, but also between workers.
Actually, going back to the petition system, if you remember the cubicles that people used to work in, that people hated those cubicles, but
that's exactly right, Senator, because there have been this sort of low profile desk spaces. Now we're looking at going back to an area where the space goes all the way up in order to protect people in a way from potential infection from others.
how many courthouses do we have?
We have over 20, you know, I don't want to get it wrong, maybe 24. And in some counties, we have more than one courthouse. In a number of counties, we only have one building. And in Orleans, even though we have two buildings, it really functions as one building separated by the outdoors. So it's a very unique challenge. The other thing we find, and I think we've talked about this before in other contexts, we need more courtrooms. And so one of the things we'll be looking at is, obviously, we're going to use the courtrooms we can, again, using equipment, partitions, and spacing. But how do you do a jury trial in a courtroom? Well, there are some buildings. One example would be the Woodstock Courthouse, where because of the original historic design, you have a jury box on one side and a grand jury box on the other side. So you can see that that might allow some kind of separation between jurors. You even put, you know, again, transparent barriers between jurors. So some courtrooms will be able to configure that way. In other cases, do we have to consider other kinds of space to do something like, you know, calling the jury pool together? Well, maybe we have to do that in a theater rather than in a courthouse. These are not things I'm proposing, but giving you an idea.
No, I'm just picturing how you do a jury trial with the lawyers coming to the bench to talk to the judge. You know, out of
That's
sight
right.
of
It'll
the-
be different.
out of hearing of the jury. But you can't, nobody can be within 6 feet of each other. I don't know.
Well, I'm always talking about silver linings in what we're dealing with. One of the silver linings is that there are 50 other or 49 other states plus a territory or two who have similar problems. And one of the
Yeah.
things we've been doing during the pandemic is having frequent national meetings, the same way we're meeting today, talking about these kinds of issues. And so on a nationwide basis, state judiciaries are addressing this, and we all participate on different committees. And so we're not having to do it within an island. One of the areas I would have hoped was further along, but is not as far along as you would like, is the extent to which one could use technology to handle some of the preliminary parts of a jury trial and even handling a jury trial. I don't think there's any shining star yet out in the country where they've mastered this, but all of us are looking at that right now. And just as the judiciary right now is conducting pilots of all kinds of different ways to do things on a nationwide basis, we'll be trying to learn from our colleagues on that. But in order to,
yeah. If we could get to some specific, I'm looking right now at one thing I know that Appropriations Committee and the administration hates is limited service positions. And you've got 12 limited service positions. That would be one-time cost of $50,000, FY20, $200,000, and then 1.2 million in FY21. And the problem with FY21, if it's not, I mean, I'm assuming the way you're talking, it's all COVID CARES Act money. But when we get to the 21 budget, we have a 17% reduction in revenues from what we anticipated. So,
yeah, so we're in
but anyway, yeah, if you could explain why we need 12 limited service positions.
Yeah, it's actually more than that when you go through the list. So, and this, we are, partners with you and with the executive branch in evaluating how to address these issues in the context of the current guidance on the funding and the completely different needs we have to address these issues, particularly through technology, when we hadn't had that before. And so this funding under the current guidance can only be used, it can't be used for current budget items. It can only be used for COVID related items.
Right.
And so I'll get into the details in a minute, but we understand that there's a time at which this funding goes away, and then we will be back addressing things in the context of our normal general funds budget. And so I think as partners with the other two branches, we hope to have a process that might be a little bit different from the usual process. Usually in budgeting, there's this linear process, things that happen in the governor's office, and then we knock on the door and say, remember, we're a separate branch, and we talk to the governor, we talk to you, and it's very linear. I think for all of us in state government, we are going to have a little bit more consultation about that so we can all be planning and brainstorming. So we understand that when we bring all these limited service positions in that will be funded by COVID-19, that it's unlikely that the next day when the COVID-19 money runs out, the legislature is going to go, oh, here's some general fund money to cover these additional new positions. On the other hand, we will have time between now and then to manage I think, how one plans the transition back to a more normal budgeting cycle. So I would just say that as a big frame, but let me explain to you where those positions are being used right now. So in terms of the spaces for judiciary staff and participants in court proceedings, and this is around all our 20+ courthouse buildings, we'll be engaging one individual either in a limited service position or in a contract consulting role, depending on who it is and what their organization is, to oversee that, to have the expertise, develop the expertise, to come up with the best way to work with our buildings, in a kind of project management role, hopefully working in collaboration with BGS, who is our landlord, and with people working in the courts. We don't have cookie cutter courthouses, each one's unique. And therefore that position is necessary due to the lean normally we're very leanly staffed in the judiciary at the management administrative level. And so, for example, Greg Mosley, who's our chief of finance and administration, not only does budget, but he's also getting masks. You know, we're a kind of microcosm of a larger organization. So we need one position that's just dedicated to this. And then in the remote technology for court proceedings, which is covered on the bottom of page 2 and the top of page 3, we are, as soon as we are comfortable that we can proceed, we will be installing video endpoints in all courtrooms so that we could do video from all courtrooms throughout the state, and purchasing the WebEx licenses because remember, these will be unlike now when we're doing a video here and a video there, and we're bringing in existing staff and taking them off one job to experiment with, does this video work? We'll be running all our courts as much as possible in the beginning, certainly on video. And so we need licenses for the hosts of those who will be judges, superior court clerks, and court managers. But then we also need limited service positions in the courthouses to support the judges, because there is, as you know, even in just a committee hearing for the legislature, you have technical support you need to manage the broadcasting, if you will, the conducting of a remote proceeding. And in the case of court hearings, we have not only people who are part of the system, a part of the state system, but we have lawyers and self-represented litigants, all of whom need to be managed, and the judge needs to concentrate on the case, not on the technical issues of the WebEx. And so those limited service positions are there to support judicial officers in the delivery of technology from that space. Then you go down to, again, on bottom of page 3, remote technologies and services for court users. We will need to we're required, as you might recall, to do interpretation, both in the case of people for whom English is not a first language, and also for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Those things are normally happening in the courtroom. We now are going to need to provide those same services. They're required to be provided, and we're going to need to do that with remote video interpretation. And so that also requires a technical setup, and it requires people in our Access and Resource Center to support those video remote interpreting throughout the state. So they provide services to each of the courthouses that has that. And then on page 4, you'll see on addressing the backlog, we're already in the process of training retired judges who have left the judiciary before we started rolling out the case management system, the electronic case management system. And as you know, we're already live in Windsor, Wyndham, and Orange. And by September or early October, we'll be live in the rest of the counties in the south and up through the west through Chittenden. And so we're going to need to provide extra staff to support the work of the retired judges who will be helping to work down the backlog. We're also going to need courtroom space. We haven't figured that out yet, but we're going to have to find a way to provide them courtroom space. And there's other limited service positions there. And then finally, and importantly, we have a constitutional responsibility for our proceedings to be public proceedings. Right now, the way we're doing that is when proceedings are in person, we permit participants in the courthouse as long as they obey all the safety rules, and we allow media in the courthouse. With remote hearings, we're going to be doing something that's comparable to what you're doing. So in addition to the WebEx that's happening in the courthouses, we will have in our Access and Resource Center people who are supporting live streaming of all those hearings, which will all be taking place simultaneously. And so there'll be some cross work between the people supporting live streaming. I think we experimented with live streaming on Facebook, but we didn't really care for that. So I think we're now with YouTube. That's part of some of the things we're experimenting with. And so, and we also have a limited service position in finance and management, finance and budget to help us track COVID-19 to make sure any expenditures we make under this category are tracked appropriately and the budget issues are taken care of. So when we come to you later, you're not saying, why did you spend all this money and now the feds won't honor it. So I think that covers the limited service positions.
Yeah, maybe if I go back to the addressing the backlog for a second. And we're going to hear from the Bar Association shortly and Matt Valerio, and I'm sure there are other members of the system who work with the judiciary. Has there been coordination on this backlog with other, like how does, you have a backlog of cases that may require probation, incarceration. Is Matt going to have enough defenders? Is the Department of State's attorneys going to have enough attorneys to handle all this backlog? Or I mean, I'm curious to know how we're going to roll this out. I see all the different site people. It's reported in the press, so-and-so was cited to, June X. And I can just see this rush of people on June X rushing in to have their day in court.
So the Supreme Court has set up a committee that's overseen by Justice Eaton, and it has some task forces. And this committee is designed to make recommendations to the court administrator and to the chief superior judge on the one hand, and also to the Supreme Court on the other hand, depending on what level of activities going on, about how we, in a measured way, kind of a reverse triage, if you will, measured way, come out of the most restrictive part of the judicial emergency and begin to take up other cases. And so that committee has done outreach to the judges who know their particular caseload best, and also looking at not only in each caseload and in each division and each type of case what's pending, but also from the Supreme Court's point of view and the constitutional responsibilities on the criminal side, and also on the civil side, and also the responsibilities to protect the most vulnerable, how Judge Grierson works to make sure that the most important cases get heard first. So that's on the judge side. We've also reached out to the Bar Association, that committee has, to solicit input from the bar about those kinds of cases. And that committee is still doing its work. And so one of the reasons you see this list, the budget list, before you see that work, is that the funding imperatives for us to be ready to provide the support to the courts in order to do this rollout, we have to buy the equipment now. We have to train the judges now so that we're ready as this slow rollout takes place. And as you know, from your knowledge of how the court has handled AO 49, the court has really paid close attention to the Department of Health, the Vermont Department of Health, to the statistics and the trends, to the steps that the governor has taken, and also to some of the VOSHA requirements. And so one of our, at first we had a pretty big challenge because we had staff out for various reasons. As we're looking at it now, Does the noise in the background of outdoor workers bother you? Okay, good. So as you're, as we're looking at it now, and I got distracted from that. Let me just think where I was before they started up the drill. So in any event, I lost my train of thought there, but we need to already be ready for what the court is offering. And the reason we had to do this right away is that we're already spending the money. And we know that now that the legislative process has kicked in, we don't want to get out ahead of the legislature, but we also want to be ready. And so I think we will continue to be consulting with the various parties in the system over the next, I would say, week or so. What we hope is that the court would be able to assimilate all the input it's received and produce a recommendation to me and to Judge Grierson and to the court sometime next week. I can't hear you, Senator. You're muted.
I muted myself.
Oh.
If I'm going to break here to ask if the committee members have any questions or comments at this point, before we go on with it basically totals $10 million. So just Nick, Senator White.
I just was going to comment that when Pat was talking about the time frame for this is March 15th to December 2020. So I think for the CARES money, so it has to be spent by December 2020.
That's right, and that's the intention. I think the one area in the chart I gave you is that it's possible that the FY21 money that's listed, that may not be accurate because that may have been on an annualized basis in FY21. And so that's something, that we are working on this week, but I wanted to get you something today for the committee.
Yeah.
So we haven't yet testified in front of House Appropriations. So
Right.
when we do, we will have that more.
Well, this may come actually to the Joint Fiscal Committee because they're looking at the grant itself.
Right.
We are. We're looking at the grant and how that's used. So it all gets a little confusing, but I'm glad we're preparing. One question that I have is about the probate courts. Since there's 14 of them, I'm sure they're backed up as well. They were traditionally backed up in many courts just from the sheer volume that we were seeing. So is that part of this plan?
So actually, that's an interesting question in terms of the use of retired judges. And so I would have to defer to Justice Eaton's committee as to how because remember, there's only one full-time probate judge in the system, and that's in Chittenden. In the other counties, those are part-time probate judges. Some of them have their job as a probate judge as their only job. And so then the question might be there, if you had a backlog, would the legislature want to do something, to add some temporary extra time? And some of them do have other jobs where they might not be able to. So, the probate division is a part of the Superior Court now. And we're going to be meeting later this afternoon with Justice Eaton's committee. And so that's something I can raise with him in terms of looking at the probate division. We are also looking at backlogs. To collect the backlog right now is a little challenging because we've got 3 counties that just went on electronic case management system, and then we have our other counties on the regular system. But we are putting together information about the backlogs so that we can be more evidence-based with our approach in terms of where we put resources.
The electronic system will be in next week.
Yes, I know. That's I
But
was looking forward to talking about money today.
yeah, Terry or Matt Valerio who are still on, or Judge Gerson, any comments on where we are so far? Matt?
Sure. I think as I had indicated a little bit earlier, our biggest concern right now is with this wave that's going to be coming of unarraigned and undocketed cases that have basically been deferred over a 3-month period. We're in an odd situation right now. There's a hiring freeze in government. We have people who have left in positions we were attempting to recruit for and hire for that we can't recruit for and hire for. We're also coming up at the end of the fiscal year where we will be renewing contracts. And as you know, half of our system is contracts and the other half is staff.
Yeah.
So, one side is just as important as the other. And we don't really know what our budget is going to be like in dealing with the, going forward with the next year. So all of our contracts end at the end of June. So we have a lot of stuff up in the air. And, I had, as has routinely been the case, the governor's recommend didn't provide increases for any of the contractors, particularly the assigned counsel conflict contractors. So it's not a matter of increases is one thing and getting more people. I don't know that we'll be able to do that. But if the courts have increased capacity to push cases through the system, we aren't going to have increased people to make that happen under the current scenario. So that's clearly a concern. I don't know how that's all going to pan out. I generally feel that if we were able to fill all of the positions that we have, that we would be okay. But, I could see things getting tense with the courts as there's this surge of cases that comes in and the desire to move them through. It happens on a regular basis when there isn't a surge. So, it's just we're dealing in sort of uncharted waters here, trying to anticipate what will happen. But I know it's not going to be easy.
This freeze in hiring is going to impact you, and I believe the state's attorneys are in that same boat.
Right.
And so you're going to have more judges. You're going to have more. I'm going to take this too as a problem that needs to be addressed by the special committee on reopening Vermont.
Yeah. I think too that one of the things that really has to be.
And by the way, if you drop the freeze, are you going to be able to find lawyers to take the job?
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's the overriding issue, because we've had trouble hiring now for a couple of years, both in the staff system and in the contract system. We every now and then we're able to add one, but we lose one, and we can't hire unless it's Chittenden County and Burlington, Montpelier, we can hire. Even then, it takes a little longer than it used to. You get to any of the other counties and it's next to impossible. We've been recruiting for positions up in St. Albans in Franklin County for 18 months and literally don't even have applicants. It took us almost 2 years to fill one position in Rutland.
Wow.
God forbid if I have an issue in Lamoille County or someplace like that where I was able to fill. Somebody retired there, and I transferred somebody from Franklin County to fill it, but I was getting no interest whatsoever from anywhere else to go to Lamoille County. So it's very difficult out there, and you know, it's all of the issues that we had before regarding hiring are going to be exacerbated by this situation. But you know, all we can do is the best we can. So
I'm going to suggest that we continue this conversation next Wednesday with the state's attorneys, the Attorney General, and Matt Valerio, and regarding the surge and how we're going to deal with the surge, and also involving corrections in that conversation, so that yeah, Senator White.
I just wondered if, in terms of the hiring freeze and the fact that when, and it isn't just in the judiciary, it's kind of all over, when we go back, we're going to need people. If that can be considered part of the COVID, so that there's at least a temporary hiring there from June to December. I don't know if we can, instead of having an absolute freeze, consider that in general.
From the judiciary's point of view, the judiciary manages its positions as a separate branch. And so any positions that get proposed, so in general, we're not filling positions in those categories where right now people are home. But I have the comparable position to the Secretary of Administration. And so to the extent the legislature funds general fund positions, you know, we can hire. If the legislature doesn't provide the funding to support general fund positions, we can't hire those positions. However, as our proposal indicates, we have a substantial number of limited service positions that are COVID related. And that's how we would be supporting the COVID pandemic issue. One other thing I wanted to mention about Matt's comments, to the extent that proceedings can be done by video, a person doesn't need to physically be in any particular place. Not all of them can be done that way. And what we've learned, and I'm sure Judge Gerson can talk in more detail about this, having video hearings is much more efficient, which is only one category. It isn't the most necessarily the most.
I really don't want to go to videos today.
Okay.
However,
anyway, it would help what Matt's concerned about.
Well, but
I still need people.
Yeah,
so
it's still, you know, in order to have a trial or a hearing, you need in a criminal, you need a defense attorney, you need a defendant, you need a prosecutor, and you need a judge, right? And all the court staff that go along with it.
That's right.
And if there's no defender available and no prosecutor available, you know, you're not going to have a great hearing, even though you've added the retired judges and all that ability. So this is one of the things that this committee will need to work on as we prepare for the reopening of these things.
The judiciary supports having adequate public defender resources, and we agree that they're not available right now. So we're all for that.
So getting back to, and Terry, I don't know if you had a comment on terms from the Bar Association on this whole discussion.
Thank you, Senator. I was just going to mention in response to your question, Justice Eaton had reached out to the bar, and we provided considerable input, including input from Matt for the criminal division cases. He asked in each division and in each case type, and what types of hearings in each case types would be priorities. So,
Yeah, we're having a hard time hearing you, Terry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to mention that we are working with Justice Eaton on the court's reopening plan and input for prioritization of case types and hearings within case types, including Matt's for the criminal division. Otherwise, I was just going to say thank you so much to Pat and to the judiciary for this very thorough plan that's looking out for the safety of court users. I know it is a big concern for litigants. And I'm really glad to hear, I assumed it was connected with the CARES money. And I'm also just assuming that if there is an antidote or vaccine or whatever, that may help, but we don't know, obviously. So I can appreciate how you need to look at a very immediate time frame and address, the present circumstances. But the bar is more than happy to help in whatever way we can. I was going to mention, and this would be for Judge Grierson and Pat, if the bar can help in terms of acting judges. I know typically lawyers who have served as acting judges either do it pro bono, or I think it's $75 a day. So, if there's anything that fits in that way, that would be helpful to move the cases for which you might use acting judges. Don't hesitate. I'm sure you would have plenty of volunteers.
Is there a way for are new lawyers able to take a bar exam now, or have that been suspended too?
I know the July date has been extended. I haven't heard if they've selected a date yet.
Okay. So that makes it even more difficult, I suppose, to get new prosecutors, new defense attorneys and so forth. Pat, if you want to continue on with your presentation, we kind of interrupted you, but I'd certainly appreciate the request, and it's pretty well outlined, reading over the document. So
Thank you, Senator.
Continue on.
Obviously, if there's any particular questions that come up after this, we're happy to answer them or to come back. But I brought together my senior executive team, and as I said, we've been consulting with other states around the country. So it's informed by what others have found effective. So if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I hope that the information I've provided in writing is helpful.
Yep. No, it's good. Thank you. Trying to learn how to chat too.
I don't know how to do that.
Well, this is a whole new world, and I'm just.
Senator Sears?
Yes.
Remember that if we're live streaming, any chat that you do also goes out to the world.
No, that was fine. It was just, we've been, Stephanie stepped out, and I don't know if she realized, Stephanie Barrett, and I was just connecting with Peggy about that. So it wasn't a secret chat. It was just Stephanie left, and I'm sure she has this document, and we'll be talking about it anyway. Any other questions or comments on this before we, it's just what it is, what it has to be done. But it's going to be difficult when you do open. And I'm really concerned about how that works.
One thing I've learned, Senator, is that we're all doing our best. Many things we hope and plan for go well, and many don't. And I think having kindness and collaboration with the other parties goes a long way, because nothing's going to be perfect for a long time, I think.
So as we're setting the agenda for next Wednesday, and we may meet on Thursday next week as well, depending upon whether or not we're going to continue to work, if we're going to continue to start to work on House bills. I really would like something similar to what I've gotten here from the court, from the state's attorneys and from the defense. And I'll talk to corrections. So Peggy, when you're putting that agenda together, please add those groups in on the budget issues. Okay. Is there any, we've got a little extra time, but I don't mean to hold everybody. I know you've all got wonderful places to go and things to do
and other meetings to have.
And other meetings. It's
Right.
This is, I will say one thing about this system. At least I can do my laundry downstairs. So I got to go check on the laundry and before the next meeting. So we'll see you all soon, and thank you all very much for everything. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
And
Thanks, committee.
I was
Bye.
happy to get it